Ramsey, Tony McCabe. And a couple of years before that, the late Pat McGeown, God bless him, a councillor for this area, had got together with myself and Arian Sherry and Jake Jackson and a few others, and we put together a short pamphlet. And the families have come a tremendous way since then. But just in reflecting, there's a new generation here. You know, I'm now older, 20 years older, and that newer generation are picking up that mantle in all these cases. And it's so important that legacy is held on to and addressed. I want to commend all the families here that have come today. There's great hurt and loss across our community that remains unresolved, and not least here in the community of West Belfast, in Westrock, Whiterock, Springhill and the Murph. Imprisonment, torture, all the carnage that was visited on these communities, all needs to be resolved. And there's huge resistance to that. But first I want to give a testimony in terms of to the family. I want to commend the families for their determined persistence and resolve to address what was a state act of terrorism on an unarmed civilian population, a cowardly act of terror that claimed the lives of 3 children, and Harry's mentioned Margaret at 13, John and Dee, Paddy Butler, a father of 6, visited by a priest, Noel Fitzpatrick, to take him to show him to get the shortcut into the way to aid those, and other people that were injured and shot going to the aid of those people. Their compassion and humanity in stark contrast stands to the brutality and the terrorism visited on this community, and it needs to be resolved. I want to commend those injured for their selfless acts of extreme courage and bravery, who in the face of great danger aided the wounded and dying in those dreadful hours. To those who opened their doors and did what they humanly could. To this community that stood with those bereaved and injured 47 years ago, a community that stands here today with the families. That you have succeeded in reopening the inquest is testament to your determination and resolve to right a terrible wrong, a terrible injustice. We all stand with you, and so should all right-thinking people on this island and beyond, regardless of their religion or politics, who profess to be concerned or have an interest in peace, the rule of law, human rights and justice. However, instead, we witness daily the unashamed hypocrisy concerning state violence from certain quarters, and I'll return to that point. I want to first set the Springhill atrocity, the Springhill massacre in context. It happened with a backdrop, and the backdrop was Ballymurphy, then it was Bloody Sunday, then it was here, and then in February 73 it was the New Lodge. And as Dee referred to earlier, it was about coming into these communities and trying to give a bloody nose. But it didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened as part of a policy that Dee related to as well, from the leafy suburbs of London and England and Whitehall and so forth. The assault on our community was an attempt to subjugate, demoralise and ultimately defeat this community, but it failed. The use of special security measures, resourcing and developing and driving military policies for this purpose all had political oversight and sanction. Corrupting the rule of law in order to achieve these key aims was a prerequisite. The adjusting of long-tested British colonial practices elsewhere across the globe with horrendous barbarity were applied here too, from the use of pseudo-gangs, murder gangs, direct state killings, torture, internment camps, special courts, the suspension of the administration of justice and the abuse of the rule of law and the abuse of power. The British Army mission in the north, Operation Banner, was to defeat the IRA, not loyalists. Viewed through the lens of our current recent history, what happened to our community, what happened here in Springhill, is how we should examine these practices. State impunity was the order of the day. Around a decade ago, we found a document in the archives, and it's from the 10th of July 1972, the day after Springhill. And in the document, well, the people at the meeting were the then British Secretary of State, the Commander of Land Forces, the General Officer commanding the British Army, the RUC Assistant Chief Constable, senior politicians and senior people from London representing the British government. And they were having discussions about what they would do in our communities. And they had a discussion in which they said we should suitably indemnify against prosecutions our soldiers and our troops when they go into areas that harbour gunmen and bombers, and they should be able to take people out without consequence. That's an official document. Now, for decades, these families have been saying there was impunity. This proves it. Here it is in black and white. In that year, British forces killed 79 people. The document also talks about cooperation with the UDA, And that year, the UDA killed 20 Catholics. And that the General Officer Commanding would be going to meet the UDA that afternoon on the 10th of July to discuss tactics. We recognise the trauma caused and the heartache of loss that the time ahead in this inquest is going to pose for the families. And like the community standing here today, we're all here with you when we're required to step in and support you and stand shoulder to soldier with you. Excuse me. Go on, Morgan. I want to address some areas of the negative reactions to the demands around legacy when concerning state violence and collusion. We hear this talk of 10%. This 10% figure bandied around to somehow or other the 367 people killed by British state forces while they wore a uniform is to be somehow dismissed. Of those 10%, and if you want to talk about it, let's have a conversation about it in terms of legacy. Why is it that 96% of them are nationalists and Catholics? Why is it of the 10% killed that over 80 of them are children? The vast majority are unarmed, uninvolved civilians. And of those combatants that were killed, many of them were unarmed and arrested and executed. And of those combatants engaged by British armed forces like the SAS in ambushes, there was pre-planned, meditated shoot-to-kill operations that took more resources to put in place than it would to have made safe and effective arrest under the rule of law. So let's have a conversation about that and the sectarian nature of that. And then we hear the notion about an amnesty. 25,000 people from these communities went to jail for approximately around 120,000 years. They've had their pound of flesh. They want an amnesty. If you didn't do anything wrong, why would you want an amnesty? Why would you complain from the leafy backbenches of London and Westminster and the soft leather seats of the Commons and the House of Lords about soldiers being dragged from their beds? The only people prosecuted and have been in prison over legacy have been Republicans and Loyalists. And then they talk about this whole notion that these soldiers dragged from their beds are victims. That's an absolute insult to the families here today and the families gathered around. I want to also talk about the battle against the rule of law. What we're engaged in is about upholding the rule of law and shining a light on what happened. The primacy of the rule of law we were lectured about for decades, and now we're told it can be set aside and an amnesty or a partial amnesty given. That isn't acceptable, and it won't wash. It is about accountability, and it is about the primacy of the rule of law. I want to talk about the battle to stop resources going to legacy inquests, because when we apply the rule of law, and when we get inquests opened, the money's pulled. If it's not an inquest, then it's the Police Ombudsman's Office. The Police Ombudsman's Office has 450 cases on its books, which constitute around 600 killings. And the funds for that are being withdrawn as well. I had to take Arlene Foster to court through the Loughgall families. They exposed the hypocrisy of what she was engaged in. And we had to win that in a court, and still there are no resources. So every time families make an advancement, every time families get a step forward in the court and truth and justice is on to be delivered, what we see is barricades and obstacles and consistently blocking the truth. So, you know, where we're at the minute is that we've had the consultation on dealing with the legacy of the past. We've had a clear outcome that there shouldn't be an amnesty, that there should be an implementation of the independent mechanisms to investigate the past. And the new generation. And they need to be implemented. We have a chief constable that's fought tooth and nail families in the courts, has resisted the disclosure, providing the disclosure of material around collusion. We saw it last week in Friday in the Glenanne case, 120 to 130 murders, and yet he is fighting tooth and nail to stop it coming out. We've seen in Loughlin Island, not the arrest of the exposure of a British agent at the heart of the killings, but the arrest of the two journalists who exposed it. So that the war, the assault on families, whether it's coming from Westminster and London, from their British Parliament and backbench right-wing Tory MPs and the right-wing media, The assault on families, whether it's from the PSNI, whether it's from holding back the resources through the NIO and other departments, all needs to stop. What needs to happen for the new Chief Constable is he needs to engage with the rule of law and provide the material that the families and their lawyers require. What needs to happen is the resources need to be provided to the coroner. What needs to happen is the resources needed to be provided to the Police Ombudsman's office. Because once we have mechanisms that work, what is happening is that the British and the Unionists are actively campaigning against them and starving them of resources and their ability to get to the truth. And that tells us about the narrative. Because this is really about a battle of narratives from a Unionist and British perspective. Maintaining a narrative that the UK came here, its armed forces came here, it may have made some mistakes that are accounted for. It may, along with the RUC, they have did their best to keep two warring factions apart. When in reality is that they came and they brought war to our communities. The terrorism that's talked about, that we experienced in this community, came at the barrel of a gun by people that wore British Army uniforms and represented the British state. The death squads that were sent and armed by them into these communities too were armed, controlled, directed and sent by them as well. And we need the truth about that if we're going to heal and move forward as a community and as a society. If we're going to build institutions and relationships in this island, we need to deal with all of those issues. Painful as it may be, we have to deal with it. And talk of an amnesty only benefits those people that have a vested interest in being held to account, and that is why the British government and the Unionists are shouting about an amnesty or limited protections for their soldiers. So that's the context in which we need to see it in. So we're going to be supporting with the families and all the campaigns. We're going forward. We're not going backwards. There's new generations picking up the mantle. It isn't going to go away. It isn't going to be wished away. And we're going to go forward and we're going to continue to campaign and battle. And we're going to take on the 10% nonsense, we're going to take on the amnesty nonsense, we're going to face it down as a community supporting these families, politically, civilly, socially, all of those ways forward. So it's a pleasure to be asked to come here today to talk, but we are resolved to our commitment to all the families in battling these issues, and collectively we'll get there. So, Gora Mila Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much, Harry. So, folks, I suppose we're coming to the end of the day, and on behalf of the campaign group, there's a couple of people who I would like to thank. I would like to thank the guys who helped us get the plaque. They don't want to be named, but listen, really, thank you very, very, very much for it. And the the 3 lads in Springhill who put it up yesterday, who don't want to be named either, but it was Hector Desi and Stevie McDonald. So thank you very much, Hector Desi and Stevie McDonald. And listen, folks, so I suppose thank you all very, very much, and it's a pleasure to see you all here today. So, Sinead, I suppose.
Martin.
Yes, you can.
The race. Is it got the race up? The race.
Is there a couple there?
Hi. Come on. See him.
How do you take that wreath off? I'll try to take it. Sorry, folks, I just noticed that Martin had a wreath, so thought if you want to come forward and lay that wreath.
Well done, Martin. Martin, get on that. Martin, get on that photo there.
Jay loves seeing a photograph. Get him in. You're missing your moment.